Ms. Johnson of Harris, for what purpose?
Will the author yield to some questions?
Will the author yield for the questions?
Sure.
Gentleman
Thank you,
yields.
Dr. Oliverson. I wanted to visit with you today because we did not talk about the bill yesterday.
Okay.
And I wanted to make sure some of the aspects that we were dealing with were clearly established. This bill, House Bill 957, is regarding the regulation of silencers.
Suppressors.
And suppressors.
Suppressors. There's no such thing as a silencer. But
So silencers and suppressors.
silencers do not exist, but there are suppressors.
Okay. A suppressor
Yes.
is meant to muffle the amount of decibels that are put out by the firing of the shot.
Yes, it reduces the impact noise that is generated by the exit of the bullet out of the muzzle of the rifle or the
And the
pistol.
suppressor is meant to be brought down to about what decibel?
So depends on the kind of round that you're using and the type of weapon. But as an example, if you were using a rifle without a suppressor, the sound is about 165 decibels, which is twice as loud as a jet takeoff. With a suppressor, it drops to about 140 decibels, which is equivalent to being on the deck of an active aircraft carrier.
And 120 decibels is being in a bar.
Okay?
131 or 141 was the NFL record for just screams in a stadium.
Okay.
Okay. This law also suggests that because, and I'm asking, is the intent of the author that by putting everything in Texas, you're avoiding any federal regulation to a, quote, what you're calling suppressor?
So the intent of the regulation stems from the fact that there is a CDC study that recommends the use of a firearm suppressor whenever possible. So we have federal agencies recommending their use whenever someone is shooting a firearm.
And so just to be clear, if we're talking about the concept of a suppressor, that may be for somebody who has sensitive ears or doesn't want to have hearing loss,
Not
correct?
necessarily, because according to the CDC study, even a normal healthy person who's repeatedly exposed to impact noise will sustain permanent hearing loss. Their number one recommendation of all of their conclusions was to use a firearm suppressor whenever possible to avoid permanent hearing loss.
And if an individual is practicing at a firing range by choice, they also have the ability to use ear protectants that would also reduce the decibel and impact on the ear canal, correct?
Those are also recommendations, but they were not as highly recommended as using a firearm suppressor.
But unfortunately, not everybody is a reasonable gun owner, and some people use weapons to
So
harm
Representative,
others.
this bill is not about the reasonableness or unreasonableness. This is about hearing protection. This is about following CDC guidelines.
And you want that every suppressor to be stamped made in Texas?
So the suppressor, if it was manufactured in Texas, could be stamped made in Texas. That's my understanding.
You've also limited any regulation by, quote, among others, boards, which could be school boards, councils, which could be our local councils, courts, which could be a court where I work, and university and higher education systems from making any changes.
So Representative, a firearm suppressor is just a piece of metal unless it's attached to a firearm. This does nothing to change existing laws in place with respect to where firearms can be carried or not carried.
But your statement is that any regulation by any of these entities, including schools, with regard to suppressors,
To a
as you call it,
suppressor, which, again, I will repeat what I just said, has nothing to do with a firearm, and by itself is just a piece of metal.
and a suppressor is
You
useless
can't, unless you
without
want
a
to
gun.
hit somebody with it.
But
It's
a
not a
suppressor
dangerous
is
device.
useless without a gun.
It is. So
Okay.
the point that you're making, I think, is that we're saying we could take suppressors into places. The point I'm trying to make is that without a gun, it's just basically a cylindrical piece of metal that has no real practical purpose other than a paperweight.
Exactly. And that's why suppressor with made in Texas is going to be attached to a gun. I want to also highlight everybody hem and hawed when I said silencer and said suppressor. And I understand that that's a term that you're using, but you're also cutting out.
Well, and I think it's important, since you brought it up, let's have that conversation. That is a Hollywood myth. And just like you can, we talk about cars with mufflers, it doesn't make them silent.
Okay.
There is no such thing as a silent firearm.
How about this? The law that you're repealing for Penal Code 4605A, that you're scratching out, a firearm silencer. That's
Suppressor?
not, no. Read your bill.
Suppressor.
A firearm silencer
Well,
is
that's a
what you're
misnomer,
deleting. That's not a
Representative.
Hollywood myth, right?
That's a misnomer.
That's the Texas law
It's a
you are cutting
misnomer.
out with this bill.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can call it an apple, you can call it a red apple, a green apple, whatever. It's a misnomer, and it's
I'm
not
just calling it the
representative
word
of
you're
what the
trying to
device
delete from our
actually
law.
does.